Act 1. The Agony of Distance. Imagine a world where time is measured by the wind. It is the middle of the 19th century. Global trade is booming, driven by steam and steel, but it remains entirely tethered to the natural world. For millennia, from the ancient merchant fleets carrying grain across the Mediterranean to the grand banking houses of the Renaissance, the speed of money had always been exactly the speed of a horse or a sail. Step inside a London counting house in 1850. The air is thick, quiet, and heavy. There are no screens. There are no blinking lights. There is only paper, leather, and ink. Massive ledgers bound in thick hide contain the absolute lifeblood of empires. Every transaction, every bill of exchange, every debt, and every fortune is recorded by hand. It is a world of immense, tangible physical burden. And in this world, distance is a terrifying thing. Distance is the ultimate financial risk. Consider a merchant in New York. He stands on the cobblestone docks, committing his entire family fortune to a cargo of raw cotton destined for the textile mills of England. He calculates his margins down to the penny, signs the heavy parchment, and watches the ship leave the harbor, disappearing over the gray horizon. And then, he waits. For 2 agonizing weeks, that ship crosses the Atlantic. For 14 days, the merchant is entirely blind. He has no idea what is happening in London. Has the price of cotton collapsed? Has a sudden banking panic wiped out his buyers? Has a war been declared? By the time his ship arrives in the Thames, the market could be entirely inverted. A cargo that promised a fortune upon departure could mean absolute bankruptcy upon arrival. This was the brutal reality of global finance. It was a high-stakes casino where the roulette wheel took 2 weeks to stop spinning. Information was literally chained to the physical delivery of letters. A collapse in the price of gold, the default of a massive railroad stock, the outbreak of a revolution. None of this mattered, none of it existed to the rest of the world, until a ship physically carried the news across the abyss of the ocean. Because of this, the global economy was deeply fragmented. It was isolated in regional silos, hostage to the unpredictable violence of the sea and the simple passage of time. Risk was priced into absolutely everything, and that risk was profoundly expensive. The financial capitals of the world, New York and London, were separated by an impenetrable wall of time. But the markets were expanding. The volume of capital was swelling. The financial elite could no longer tolerate this blindness. The agony of distance had become too costly. Time itself had to be conquered. Act 2. Brute force. The solution was not a faster ship. It was not a more efficient steam engine or a better trade route. To truly control the markets, humanity realized it had to do something entirely unprecedented. It had to fundamentally alter the geography of the Earth. It had to physically drag a wire across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. This was not a triumph of delicate engineering or scientific curiosity. It was a triumph of brute, mechanical force, driven by an insatiable, overwhelming economic demand. The project was not spearheaded by governments seeking diplomacy. It was driven by businessmen seeking leverage. Think of the sheer violent reality of the North Atlantic. 2.5 miles deep, freezing temperatures, crushing, unimaginable pressure. To bridge this void, men manufactured a cable of immense physical weight. 7 strands of pure copper, insulated in the thick, rubbery sap of the gutta percha tree, wrapped heavily in tarred hemp, and armored in a twisted sheath of thick iron wire. This was not just a communication tool. It was a heavy, ironclad umbilical cord of capital. The ships that carried it were weighed down by thousands of tons of metal. They sailed into the gray, turbulent swells, unspooling this massive chain into the dark water, mile after agonizing mile. The labor was backbreaking, the conditions were lethal, and they failed, repeatedly. When the cable snapped in the deep ocean, thousands of miles of wire and millions of pounds sterling vanished instantly into the mud. Investors were wiped out in a single afternoon. Critics called it a fool's errand, an impossible war against nature. But the financial elite kept funding it. They kept trying. They poured vast fortunes into the sea, over and over again, underwriting disaster after disaster. Why? Because the men funding this operation understood a fundamental truth of the new era. Whoever could collapse time would control the markets. This operation was never about sending diplomatic greetings or friendly messages across the ocean. It was about knowing the price of a British sovereign on Wall Street before anyone else. It was about knowing the fate of a merchant's cargo before the ship even appeared on the horizon. They were dropping thousands of tons of iron into the ocean to permanently eliminate financial risk. It was a brute force attack on the speed of light. They were physically dragging the old world into the new, fighting the ocean itself to secure an insurmountable financial advantage. Act 3. The Spark, August, 1858. After years of failure, on the rugged, wind-battered coast of Valentia Island, Ireland, and in the quiet, isolated woods of Newfoundland, the heavy, iron-wrapped ends of the cable are finally dragged ashore. The physical gap is closed. The copper thread now connects the two greatest financial capitals on Earth. Inside a dim, wooden telegraph house, the atmosphere is perfectly still. A brass telegraph key rests on a simple wooden table. A hand reaches down. A finger presses the heavy brass key. There is a sharp, bright electrical spark. In that exact fraction of a second, the old financial world is instantly eradicated. The 14-day delay is dead. The ocean entirely evaporates. A pulse of electricity surges through the copper core, traveling beneath miles of crushing dark water, racing across the seabed. What used to take 2 weeks of perilous sailing now takes seconds. Distance is dead. The pulse arrives on the other side. It is not just a signal, it is value itself. It is the price of gold. It is the collapse of a stock. It is the execution of a trade. With that single spark, a merchant in New York no longer trades blind. He knows exactly what his cotton is worth in London, right now, in this very second. The terrifying gamble of the sea voyage is gone. A banker can buy a security in Manhattan and sell it in London in the very same hour, locking in a profit without ever moving a physical asset. The two massive, isolated economies of the United States and the British Empire are instantly welded together into a single, synchronized entity. For the first time in human history, the speed of commerce has been permanently decoupled from the speed of human travel. Information is no longer physical. It is no longer bound by wind or tide. It is light. It is energy. This is the exact moment the modern global market takes its first breath. The heavy, dripping ledgers, the anxious crowds on the docks, and the agonizing waits in the counting houses are suddenly obsolete. With a single press of a brass key, the entire concept of financial value is forever fundamentally altered. Act 4. Speed is money. That spark in 1858 birthed a new reality. It birthed the modern phenomenon of arbitrage. Almost overnight, the global financial system rewired itself. Bankers and traders realized they could look at the price of an asset in London, see a slight discrepancy in the New York price, and execute a trade across the ocean to instantly capture the profit. The delay was gone, but a new game had begun. Risk was no longer measured in weeks or days. It was measured in minutes. The race for speed had begun, and it would never, ever stop. The mechanical ticker tape machines that soon clattered away in gaslit brokerages, spooling out endless ribbons of market data, were the direct descendants of that heavy iron cable. The financial world became hopelessly addicted to the instant flow of information. The faster you knew, the richer you became. As the decades passed, the rough, braided copper at the bottom of the Atlantic was abandoned, left to decay in the trench. It was replaced by newer cables, then by intercontinental telephones, and finally, by pure glass. Today, if you look at the infrastructure of global finance, you are looking at the direct legacy of 1858. The heavy leather ledgers have completely dissolved into abstract digital geometry. In cold, windowless, highly secured data centers, rack after rack of servers blink in total silence. They are processing millions of transactions a second, balancing the global economy through high-frequency algorithmic trading. We have come so far, yet the core principle remains exactly the same. Today, massive financial institutions spend hundreds of millions of dollars to bore straight-line tunnels through mountains and lay highly specialized fiber-optic cables across the ocean floors. They build microwave towers and laser networks. They do this just to shave mere milliseconds off the time it takes for a trade signal to travel from Chicago to New York or from London to Tokyo. A millisecond. A fraction of a heartbeat. That is the battlefield now. Wars of wealth are fought and won in windows of time too small for the human brain to even perceive. But it all traces back to that chaotic mid-19th century counting house. It traces back to the terrifying gamble of the 2-week delay and the sheer brute force required to lay a copper wire across the abyss. In 1858, humanity dragged a cable through the ocean and proved a permanent, unbreakable law of the modern world. Information speed is not just a convenience. Information speed is literal money.